Not really sure what he was trying to do with that.
Hello there, welcome to the F1 Weekend Debrief, where with the help of our resident engineering guru Rob Smedley, we're analysing the events of the Mexican and United States Grand Prix. Only one place to start, and that's with a win in Mexico and a second in Lewis Hamilton wrapped up his 6th Drivers' World Championship.
Guys, I'm speechless.
Congratulations, Lewis, 2014 World Champion.
That is it. World champion, pal. World champion.
3 times World Champion, Lewis.
That's the greatest moment of my life.
Champion of the world!
Still we rise, guys. Still we rise.
Yep, still he rises. He keeps doing it, doesn't he, Rob? How did he win this year's championship then?
Well, same as he's won all the others, to be honest with you, Ted. It's just pure consistency. You know, the guy is a machine. I remember working alongside Fernando at Ferrari, and you know, even on his bad days, it was a good day compared to everybody else. And if you look at this season, you know, I think he's had runs of 4 or 5 wins consecutively. And his worst day for the whole season, which was an utter nightmare for him in Germany, in the wet, he still got 2 points. You know, he's had no race this year where he hasn't scored points. So the guys are, he's like a jackhammer. He's just constantly there and constantly delivering.
And he seems to be, I mean, he's what, 33, 34 now, in the form of his life.
Definitely, yeah. You know, whatever he's lost from that, you know, the absolute peak of your reactions at 21 to 27 years old or whatever it is, he makes up in experience and just general craft. He has perfected his craft now.
Okay. Of course, you need the car to do it. And Mercedes have brought him the car early part of the season before Ferrari caught up. They were pretty much, you know, uncatchable before Ferrari caught up. And that really set the bedrock for it. But he had to see off Bottas.
Yeah, he did. And Valtteri, you know, I worked with Valtteri for years, and he's no slouch. He's a good driver. But at the minute, the most consistent driver in Formula One, by far, regardless of the car, is Lewis. And we've not got to forget that there's been races again this year, as there was, you know, in previous years, that Lewis really shouldn't have won. That's why he resonates so much with me. You know, his characteristics are similar to Fernando, is that every so often he'll pull something out of the bag. He's in a car that really shouldn't be winning that race, and he does it. You know, he has the skill and the might to be able to do that on the weekends, on the rare weekends where the Mercedes wasn't good enough to do it.
Any reason why he shouldn't go for 7 next year?
No,
equal Michael's record?
None whatsoever. I think you know, with the form that he's in and Mercedes are in, there's no reason why they can't beat Michael's record. You know, and I was there in those Ferrari days when we were racking up all those driver world championships with Michael. But now it's somebody else's turn, and records are there to be broken. And I, for one, you know, even though it's a record that I played a small part in, I would like to see it get broken. And I think that, you know, him and his team are the people that do it.
Right back to the race in Austin. And Rob, I think the start is worth a look at, because not only did it put Mercedes in the best place for the 1-2, but it also consigned Ferrari into the role of also-rans for the race. Helicopter shot first, and, well, Valtteri Bottas from pole position, he perfectly went to the middle of the track to cover off everybody. But then who are we looking at here? Max?
Well, you see, Max, he's got the outside line there with Sebastian, who's just got consigned to 3rd now. Watch Lewis come at him now around turn 2 and has to back out. He's done the right thing there. But you could see on that left-hand side that neither Ferrari got away particularly well. But then even up at turn 1, Sebastian was still lacking grip. You know, here's another angle here, and you can kind of see that both Ferraris kind of trudge away. Albon, who's also on the left-hand side, gets a much better start. Max just drives around the outside of Sebastian there. He's just got much better grip.
What do you think it was with the Ferraris? We'll have a look later on at their sort of general lack of race pace. But, I mean, they were starting on the medium tyre. Seemed like they struggled to get temperature in it.
Yeah, they started on the medium tyre, as did the Mercedes and Max Verstappen. Absolutely, it was clear that they couldn't get temperature into the tyres. I mean, the first laps of the race, Sebastian was actually calling that he had a problem. He thought that there was something wrong with the car. The understeer was that chronic. And then he started to, you could see from the in-car camera that he started to cope with it a little bit more. He was probably changing some settings on the car, but they really, really struggled to get the tyres into the working range.
Well, what good opportunity to actually have a look at that onboard camera. And well, we've seen some shots from the in-car, but actually when you have a look at it from the chassis camera, the 360-degree camera, this really tells its own story. Off the start, not so, well, no, Bottas does get him better off the start.
Yeah, Valtteri's much quicker. You can see that he's away, but look at how late Max brakes. But it's not just how late he brakes, because then you would expect that Sebastian does have a decent line through there, but he's just got, when you watch it from the in-car, he's got way too much understeer. And then this first part here, he's kind of hanging on. Again, the 360 perhaps doesn't show it very well, but just general level of grip. The car's very twitchy, understeer. Up here around turn 7, this is the best bit. So look to the left, and here's Lewis, goes right round the outside of him. I mean, there's no way that you should be passing a car around the outside there. So he's got very little grip. And then again, he didn't get such a bad exit down here, but when you look breaking into turn 11, 12,
here comes Charles.
There's Charles, straight up the inside. So he's really, really struggling, and you can see that he's got a huge amount of understeer. The front's just not working. He tries again with to come back at Charles, but Charles is on the racing line. Has probably just got a little bit more tyre temperature as well, and then just closes him off around here at the end of the back straight.
Looks like there was almost a tap between them, but nothing much. And then we got, of course, a McLaren behind us of Lando Norris, who eventually
comes past. You'll see him come past there, but that's because Sebastian understeers wide, so into that tight left-hander there, which is almost a hairpin when you walk around the track. Be around about second gear. He just understeers wide. I don't know whether he locks the front, but certainly he understeers wide, and then Lando comes through. Yeah,
well, trying to recover from that bad start, Sebastian Vettel was pushing quite hard, and having finished second in Mexico, perhaps the last thing he expected in Austin was to be the first race retirement, but that's exactly what happened with this rather curious suspension failure.
Yeah, this shot that we're seeing now, it's already gone, but you can see when he comes round at the top of the hill there, that's when you get the instantaneous failure. And looking back at the in-car camera before that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. We've got the in-car camera that looks back at the rear axle or on the rear wing, and you can see that there's nothing wrong with it. So it's an instantaneous failure as he gets over that curb there.
What do you think caused it?
Very, very difficult. I mean, when you see the car come back on the truck, you can see that both the upper and lower wishbone forward legs have been, they're completely destroyed. The pull rod still looks as if it's intact. So whether or not the pull rod's broken down at the suspension.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So this bit here, you can see that the certainly the top wishbone there, that's in fairly bad shape. The bottom, the contrast is a little bit difficult to see, but just on your right-hand side of the screen, the bottom wishbone where it feeds into the bodywork there has gone. The pull rod, which is at the top left-hand side of the screen and disappearing into the bodywork, that still looks like it's intact. So very, very strange failure, to be honest.
Okay, well, you think it's strange. Sebastian certainly wasn't particularly impressed over the team radio.
I think the suspension just failed. Yeah, failed. Something broke. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Completely failed.
Right, well, we've come into our Race Watch suite to explain one of the technical stories of the weekend. That was, Rob, the emergence of Technical Directive 35 concerning the fuel flow meter between the fuel tank and the engine. Now, what did Technical Directive 35 clear up in terms of what people might have been able to do with that fuel flow meter?
So what it talked about was signal processing, sampling rate, and aliasing. So I've tried to do a really, really simple example here of a signal, and so we can explain what aliasing is.
Okay, but this is the signal from the fuel flow meter to the electronic control unit where they can tell what it's measuring.
Yeah, how it's logged, and then how the FIA then read that data that's been logged by the team.
Okay, carry on. So
essentially, what I've got here is a sinusoidal signal. Okay, so the blue is what you see is the sinusoidal signal going up and down. The period is what we call in signal processing. The period is the time that it takes to do a full cycle of that signal. So you see it goes from the top of the trace down to the bottom and then back up again.
Yep.
So the period in this case is 4 seconds, and for each of the quarter of the period, so for it to go from +1, as we've got here, down to the 0 position, it takes 1 second.
Right.
And then to go down to -1, it takes another second, and then go back to 0 is another second, and then to complete the cycle is another second.
Okay.
Now, what we see here is the amplitude, so that's the peak of the signal. Right. So that's the signal explained. Now, if I talk about what aliasing is the sampling rate at which I'm going to read the signal. So if I'm going to read the signal every second, okay, starting from time 0, so time 0 is here, and if I read it at every second, then I more or less have a good approximation of what that signal is doing. So I read it here, 1 second later I read it here,
Yep.
a second later I read it here, a second later there, and so on and so forth, and I have a reasonably good approximation of what that signal is doing. Okay. If I have a latency in my sampling, so I start to read it, for example, here, okay, then the first signal that I pick up is there, and it's at half of the amplitude,
Yeah.
or half the peak. If I read it 1 second later and I read it here,
Yeah.
then it's there. 1 second later and it would have moved to there, and a second later it would have moved to there. So my signal, my alias or my approximated signal, looks like this.
Okay.
So what I'm missing here are these peaks. Now, if my signal is not a made-up sinusoidal signal, but a fuel flow rate, then what I'm reading, or what I'm apparently reading, my amplitude, is actually half of the real amplitude. So you see that the real amplitude is here, the real peak is here. This could be fuel flow rate, and this could be higher than what I'm actually reading. So that's what TD35 tried to clear up.
Okay, so if you built in the latency, and it's the teams who decide that, is that right? The teams decide when they're going to read this.
Well, the sensor itself is an FIA homologated sensor.
Right.
So that has an internal filter in it in any case. But then the sampling rate and the way that the data is taken off the car, that's at the behest of the teams, yeah.
Okay, all right. So it could be doing some other stuff, but as far as the fuel flow meter is concerned, it's only reading it at a certain level, at a different level.
Yeah, it could be. It could be at a certain frequency.
Right.
So it could be at a certain engine speed, or a certain fuel flow rate that it's reading it at a certain frequency, and you're getting an alias signal.
All right, and the technical directive cleared that up and said that you're not allowed to do that anymore. What, from the Austin weekend onwards?
Well, you've never really been allowed to do it, but it was just clarifying that it's just not allowed.
Okay, all right. Now, let's get on to what happened with Ferrari's speed, shall we? And the GPS trace available to all the teams in Austin clearly shows, and you can see it here, that the Ferrari had lost much, if not all of its straight line speed advantage that it had in Mexico City. So if we then have a look, Rob, on, we've got some pictures here. What can explain Ferrari losing their straight line speed advantage?
Well, when we were chatting about it over the weekend, you know, there's two things. Clearly, as you've just said, the GPS trace, you know, which is available to everybody, that did show that there was a loss in straight line speed for the Ferrari. That can be attributable to the engine power. You need an awful lot of engine power to see the delta that we saw from Mexico to USA, or it can be attributable to the aerodynamics. And we mustn't rule neither out, to be honest. So what we did here, what we've tried to do here, is we've tried to have an appraisal of what the rear wings structure has been.
Yep.
From going from Japan to Mexico and then to the USA. So if we look at this bottom row down here, I think this is the reference of Mercedes. And so here's the rear wing in Japan, the same in Mexico and the same in USA. And predominantly that rear wing looks very, very similar.
Yep.
And if a Formula One team wants to change that, the lift and drag level on the car, the best way of doing it is on the rear wing, or the most obvious way of doing it is on the rear wing. You can do it other ways, but it's much more subtle.
Okay.
If we now look at the Ferrari, then in Japan, you can clearly see there's a difference in the rear wing level going from Japan to Mexico, and that makes sense because Mexico is absolutely max downforce.
Yep.
It's Monaco downforce.
Yep.
because of the conditions that you've got there. And if you look at the rear wing then from Mexico to USA, that rear wing is the same. So it's predominantly the same macroscopically, as we've said about the Mercedes rear wing. Okay. But you can see that they've increased the downforce going from Japan to Mexico. But from Mexico to USA, it's the same.
Right, time for good day, bad day. Who was awesome in Austin and who was headed for an early barbecue with some pulled pork and brisket? First of all, Danny Kvyat, for a second time in a week, Rob, involved in an end-of-race incident, this time with Sergio Perez. Before we look at the accident itself, let's hear from both of them.
I see that probably they penalized Kvyat because I can see that we got the point, so I think it's quite fair. He just dived in, didn't lift under the yellow flags, and just pushed me off the track.
Yeah, I got the point on track, and it was deemed apparently too aggressive. I've seen harder racing than that, to be honest, without getting penalized. So yeah, I'm very disappointed why it had to happen with myself, and I'm very upset with this penalty. Of course, I feel like more often is something that I do, and they just give me the penalty. And Verstappen and Leclerc, no penalty in Austria. Me and Perez here, penalty. Fine. Well, I just keep fighting. What can I do? I'm a hard racing driver, and every time I try to put myself out there, they just take it away from me.
Right. Well, does Kvyat have a point? Was what he did with Sergio the same as Verstappen and Leclerc in Austria?
No, not really. I think he's a good lad, Daniel. I think in the cold light today, he'll probably understand what's happened. If you look at the images behind us, he gets up on the sausage curb. He's right to go for the move. It's the last lap, and why wouldn't he? He's a racing driver. But in doing so, you can see that he gets up on the sausage curb and he kind of loses control and understeers into the side of Checo. So I think that you kind of banged the rights there.
Second time in a week. He did it with Hülkenberg at the end of Mexico, and he's done it again. I can understand why he gets himself into this position. He had new tyres. He was obviously a bit quicker, but that's not going to get him the Red Bull drive next year.
Well, that bit won't. No, definitely not. But he's. I think when you heard from his interview, he's quite passionate about what he does. I still got a lot of respect for him, the way he's bounced back. Come back into Formula One this year, and he's a little bit more pace than the two Renaults in the race, that's for sure.
All right, good day for Daniel Ricciardo. Not so bad for Kimi Räikkönen as well, with a fantastic first lap on the soft tyres, which helped. But he gets one of the Haas's straight away, and then, well, he makes up quite a few places.
Yeah, he gets one of the Haas's, he outbreaks the Toro Rosso there, and you can see him going around the outside and makes that stick, which was a...
Look at Stroll, he's just about to get his own moment.
Whoop. Yeah, Lance has a massive oversteer in turn 2 there, and he goes past. I think he gets past Hülkenberg here, who's on the hard tyre, and Kimi's on the soft tyre, so, he's got a lot more grip there. He's basically driven, he's used those soft tyres, as you quite rightly pointed out, to the maximum of their capabilities. That's one thing that I can remember about Kimi at Ferrari, was he had this innate capability, I think better than most other drivers that I've ever worked with, to really feel the grip in the first lap and exploit the car to the maximum.
Okay, well, sadly it ended up with no points for Kimi, but it was also no points and not a good day for the Haas drivers at their home race. Romain Grosjean was 15th, and teammate Kevin Magnussen ended his race with an exploding brake disc into the gravel. Well, if it's not aerodynamics not working on the car, it's the brakes as well. This one's pretty scary. Did he have any brakes to stop the car?
Well, I would say either none or very little at that point, because once that you see that the brake disc exploded from the puff of smoke, and then if it's pushed the pistons out of the calipers, it means that, you know, all the hydraulic fluids coming out. Certainly won't have had the same pedal as he had before, and he just couldn't stop the car. You see that, so that's why there's a big long gravel trap at the end of that straight, because the cars are going quite quick there, and if they've got no brakes, they do need to stop.
Okay, well, there are just 2 more opportunities this season for those drivers to make amends. 2 more races, starting with the Brazilian Grand Prix in Sao Paulo. And while you get a taster of the Brazil race to come, Rob and I are going to try a bit of time travel.
Here we are then in Interlagos.
How many people you want to crash?
Yes, the Brazilian Grand Prix, we're looking forward to that. But as if by magic, Rob and I have teleported back to Austin, Texas, where, Rob, we have a look at the model of the new Formula One for 2021. Tell us, talk about the key points of this car and how they're going to improve the racing.
So I mean, talking about it philosophically of what we're trying to achieve, the biggest point aerodynamically is that when one car follows another, then what happens is it loses a lot of downforce, because there's a lot of turbulent air and wake that comes off the car. So the current crop of Formula One cars, the current generation, and for the last decade or whatever, they've had a wake which outwashes, and that creates very, very turbulent air for the car behind to run into. With this generation of car, it's essentially a ground effect car, so it's a big wing section underneath the car. But the front wing is much less sensitive than it was before. So there's far fewer vortex structures than can come off that front wing, which creates a huge, very, very high downforce, because it's very high energy airflow. But that makes the cars very, very sensitive. So we're essentially trying to get the wake out the back of the car to wash up. So you can see that the diffuser entry here is much bigger, and then as it curves down towards the middle of the car and then back up, it creates this ground effect, like a wing section. So you've got a huge volumetric entry there, and then as you come out the back of the car and you go and have a look from behind, you can see that it's got these massive diffuser tunnels as well. So we're creating a massive amount of downforce just from this ground effect of the floor. So that ground effect of the floor is creating a huge amount of downforce, which means that we're much less reliant on the vortex structures off the front wing, on the rear wing itself. And with the creation of an upwashing wake, so a wake that's kind of the energy, all that turbulent air that's pushed up above the car behind, then it means that the resultant is that the car behind only loses something like 10%, or even a little bit less than that of when you're following it around about a second, compared to about 50% now.
Okay, great stuff. And with the 18-inch wheels, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And it's not the finished model, is it? There'll still be some scope for the teams to play with the rear wings and the front wings to make them do what they want with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one interpretation of the 2021 regulations, but there's a lot of scope for the teams to work within those regulations, and we'll see lots of different shapes and lots of different solutions to the 2021 car.
Okay, fantastic. That's the checkered flag from us. So Rob Smedley, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you after the Brazilian Grand Prix. But from here, from us in Austin, and from us back at Biggin Hill, it's goodbye.